Today, I'm going to be telling you 3 true crime stories linked by a single theme. All of these cases have final images associated with them that are particularly haunting or which have unsettling context behind them. As always, my name is Nigel. I run this channel with my good friend Luke, and welcome back to Crime Zone. A reminder, if you do find today's video interesting and informative, be sure to like and subscribe for more true crime stories told with a mysterious and suspenseful vibe. Also, if you're particularly into cases like these, we've included links to other similar videos we've done before in the description below. So definitely check those out next. With that out of the way, let's dive in. On the evening of November 1st, 2017, a man and woman were enjoying a night out in North Miami Beach, Florida, when they decided to stop to take out some cash. After spotting a Bank of America at the corner of Miami Beach Boulevard and 12th Avenue, the couple pulled into the parking lot around the back to use the branch's drive-through ATM. The man was in the middle of making his withdrawal when suddenly his girlfriend got very nervous. She told him to hurry up and that they needed to get out of there as soon as possible. For a second, the man was confused until his girlfriend told him what was bothering her. She pointed to what was clearly a person hiding in the trees behind them at the back of the parking lot. She said, "That guy in the hoodie is up to something. We need to be careful." Before the man could even react, the stranger started walking in their direction. It seemed like he heard the two of them talking, though, because after taking a few steps towards their vehicle, he adjusted his path. Even so, the couple wasn't about to stick around any longer than they needed to, and they began driving off. Well, this turned out to be an extremely wise choice. Unfortunately, though, things wouldn't work out so well for the next person to find themselves in this situation. At nearly the exact same time that all of this was happening, another vehicle pulled into the Bank of America parking lot. Inside was 26-year-old Dylan Steve and his mother, Sandy. Rather than going to the drive-thru, though, Dylan got out of his mom's van and headed over to one of the ATMs on the bank's exterior wall. What happened next was captured both by surveillance cameras on the building and by the ATM's built-in camera. As you can see, Dylan begins his withdrawal, and at first, everything seems totally normal. But if you watch over his left shoulder, you'll notice that there's someone moving towards him in the background. It was that same man that the couple had seen moments earlier. If you look closely, you can actually see that at the beginning of the clip, the man is over by the drive-through ATM. After changing the direction he was walking, he had started heading over towards Dylan instead. Disturbingly, Dylan is completely unaware of what is happening right up until the last moment. That's when the man, who was dressed in a Joker hoodie with the words "Kill Batman" written on it, ambushes him with a gun. The man in the hoodie demands that Dylan hand over the money he'd just taken out, and initially, Dylan simply tries to back away. After realizing that the other man is armed, Dylan drops the cash on the ground. But when the robber bends over to pick it up, Dylan lunges at him. The two struggle, and the man in the hoodie manages to run off. But it's clear that at this point, something is seriously wrong. Dylan begins clutching at his upper torso and hurries back over to his mom's van. He stays on his feet for a few seconds, but soon he collapses in the parking lot. During the struggle, the man in the hoodie had fired a single shot. The bullet went through one of Dylan's hands before hitting him in the chest. After hearing both the gunshot and Sandy's screams for help, witnesses, including the couple who'd just driven away, rushed over and called 911. Emergency responders arrived quickly, and Dylan was taken to a nearby hospital. But sadly, his injuries were too severe. He was pronounced dead later that night. Thanks to the stunningly clear and chilling surveillance footage that captured Dylan's final moments, it didn't take authorities long to figure out who his killer was. By the following evening, after circulating still images from the video, local police had made an arrest. The gunman was identified as 17-year-old Marcin Bernard Hill. It would soon be revealed that despite Hill's young age, he had a lengthy criminal history. He'd first been arrested when he was just 11 years old. And while his initial arrests had been for relatively minor offenses, things had escalated the older he got. He'd been accused of at least 4 strong-arm robberies by the time of Dylan Steeves' murder. However, up to this point, he'd never faced serious consequences. This was for a couple of reasons. Partly because he was a minor, but also because many of the charges against him in these cases were dropped. In at least 2, courts ruled that he was mentally unable to stand trial. Understandably, all of this was incredibly devastating for Dylan's loved ones, but what upset them even more was how senseless all of this was. He'd been killed over less than $300. Sadly, we were unable to find any information about Dylan's life online, but from statements made by his family members in court, it's clear that he was very much loved. As you might imagine, the situation was particularly hard on his mother, who had been forced to watch his murder. In August of 2019, Marcin Hill agreed to plead guilty to second-degree murder. As part of his plea deal, he was sentenced to 25 years in prison, plus an additional 10 years of probation. At the hearing, Dylan's family members expressed their frustration with what they viewed as an extremely lenient sentence considering the circumstances. Dylan's brother Austin said, quote, "I'd just like to say that 25 years is too good for a criminal of this caliber." Sandy added, quote, "He took my life when he took my son's. He's a menace to society. He's the devil. He's a devil that destroyed our lives." According to the latest available information, Marcin Hill will be eligible for release in 2042, when he is 42 years old. In early 2013, 45-year-old Tanya McLean Bird was taking life day by day. The New York City mother of 3 had a lot of responsibilities. In addition to working hard as a certified nursing assistant for a home care and health services company, she looked after 2 of her 3 children. Tanya's youngest son, Nazir, was 7 years old and was born with Down syndrome. Her other son, 23-year-old Basid McLean, had his own challenges. From the time he was a boy, he'd struggled with mental health issues, including schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. He'd also been diagnosed with a learning disability. As a result, both Basid and Nazir lived with Tanya at her apartment in South Bronx's Melrose neighborhood. Now, Tanya was no stranger to hardship herself. As a young mother, she'd struggled with drug addiction. However, she'd eventually managed to turn her life around. From the sounds of it, she did this in large part for her kids. Back then, Basid and her daughter Portia had actually been taken away from her and placed in foster care. She had hated not being able to be there for them, and ever since, she'd been determined to do everything within her power to make it up to them. By all accounts, that's exactly what she did. Those close to Tanya described her as upbeat and generous. Despite caregiving being some of the most emotionally demanding work out there, she never lost this spirit or the ever-present smile that she was known for. One friend put it this way, quote, "Anything you would have needed, she would have given it to you with an open arm. Anything." Sadly, though, in an awful twist of irony, it was Tanya's devotion to looking after the people around her that would ultimately play a part in what happened next. At around 4:30 a.m. on February 26, 2013, a man named James Daniels was taking his dog Nana out for an early walk. That morning, they were heading along their usual route down Eagle Avenue, when suddenly, Nana started behaving strangely. As they approached the intersection of Eagle and 156th Street, there was some garbage piled out by the curb. This wasn't unusual, but what was bizarre was that Nana seemed very drawn towards the area. Specifically, to a heavy-duty black garbage bag and a small suitcase. James tried to coax Nana into continuing, but he could not get her to leave these bags alone. Deciding to find out what was inside, he bent down and opened one of them up. As soon as he stuck his hand in, he was met with the unmistakable feeling of human flesh. That's when he called 911. James was completely terrified, so he didn't dare go any further as he waited for police to arrive. Part of him worried that what he had stumbled across was a baby, so he just couldn't bring himself to investigate further. When officers from the NYPD got there and began their own investigation, it turned out that James's suspicions were wrong, but unfortunately, the truth was no less horrifying. Inside those bags were the partial remains of a middle-aged woman. And pretty soon, more discoveries would follow. Just a heads up, reporting on the exact details of this is quite fuzzy, with news sources from the time making a lot of conflicting claims. But what we do know is that over the next several hours, the NYPD recovered additional human remains in at least 3 other places under basically identical conditions. All of these spots were nearby, and all of the remains were determined to be from this same female victim. Among the body parts found were legs, hands, part of a torso, and a head. No sooner had all of this been uncovered than police received a phone call. The call came into the NYPD's 40th precinct. It was from Bossid McLean, who said that he wanted to report his mother Tanya missing. And the second he provided his address, authorities knew the situation likely wasn't good. He said he, his mom, and his brother lived in a building on Westchester Avenue. It was only about a block from where some of the remains had been found. Sure enough, when police went over to the apartment complex and spoke to Bossid, their worst fears were confirmed. After officers asked to see a photo of Tanya, Bossid scrolled through his cell phone for a bit before showing them a picture of her. It was clear that Tanya was their victim. Upon being asked for more information, Bossid said that his mother had been missing for at least a day, and he told investigators that the last time he'd seen her, she was in the company of an ex-boyfriend. Detectives would soon find out that this is something that other family members had heard from Bossid as well. But there was a problem. No one who was close to Tanya knew anything about a supposed ex-boyfriend. Tanya didn't have a lot of free time, and she wasn't really dating, so the idea that she would have gone off with some guy seemed strange. There was something else that was arguably even more troubling, though. As officers stood in Tanya's apartment talking to Bossid, they couldn't help but notice the overwhelming smell of bleach. This prompted them to check the surveillance cameras at the apartment complex. What they saw was incredibly disturbing. The footage showed that between the previous night and early that morning, 2 men had made several trips in and out of the building. One of those men was clearly Bossid, and as he walked off the elevator and through the lobby, he was carrying with him a collection of black plastic garbage bags. Exterior cameras showed him and the other man loading these bags into a shopping cart and wheeling it down the road in the exact direction where Tanya's remains were later recovered. At this point, police had more than enough to allow them to search the rest of Tanya's apartment. Of course, as they had feared when they smelled the bleach earlier, serious attempts at a cleanup had been made. But even so, there was plenty of evidence of the horrific events that had taken place here. This included bloodstains, a knife believed to be the murder weapon, and the shopping cart seen in the surveillance footage. Easily the most disturbing finding of all, though, was the box from a 2-foot-long reciprocating saw. Because it was now undeniable that Bossid McLean was involved in his own mother's murder, he was taken down to the 40th precinct for questioning. But once there, things got more complicated. After identifying the other man in the CCTV video as his 26-year-old friend William Harris, Bossid claimed he was the main person responsible for the crime. Bossid told detectives that in the early morning hours of February 25th, so the day before Tanya's remains were found, he and William had been hanging out at the apartment. He said that he left to go and use an ATM, and that when he returned, he discovered that William had killed his mom. He stated that he only went along with the gruesome cover-up because William threatened to kill him and his little brother if he didn't play along. When William was brought in for questioning, he said the exact opposite. He claimed that he was the one who had arrived after the murder, and that he was only involved in the cover-up. So, who was telling the truth? Well, initially, it seemed like there might be something to Bossid's story, since police did soon find that reciprocating saw used in the crime at a residence linked to William. However, the idea that Bossid was somehow an unwilling participant in all of this completely went out the window when detectives got a look at his cell phone. Remember earlier when I said that Bossid had to scroll around a bit before he was able to show police a picture of his mother? Well, as it turned out, part of the reason for that was that he didn't want them to see the most recent photos in his camera roll. All of these photos were extremely disturbing, but one of them in particular would be seared into the minds of investigators forever. It was this selfie that Bossett had taken of him smirking and holding something up to the camera. If you're wondering why the right side of this image is completely blocked out, it's because the thing Bossett was holding was his mother's head. When confronted with all of the evidence, Bossett did sort of change his story. He still claimed that William was mostly responsible for what had happened, but he clearly had no problem giving a very calm, detailed, and unbelievably chilling accounting of murdering and disposing of his mother. The whole thing made police certain he was really the one behind the whole plan. To give you an idea, during the interview, Bossett stated at one point, quote, "If you can kill somebody, you should be able to cut them up too. If you can't do that, if you don't have the stomach to cut them up, then you're a coward." Quite a few different competing explanations and theories would ultimately be given for what had happened to Tanya, as well as the motive behind her murder. However, after speaking more to other family members, this is what authorities came to believe. So, I told you before that Bossett had been suffering from mental health issues for a long time, but what I didn't mention is that things had been getting progressively worse the older he got. Prior to the killing, he'd already been arrested numerous times, and in 2010, he'd ended up serving jail time for attacking 2 police officers in Brooklyn. Family members described him as destructive and out of control, saying he had no ability to control his anger. Making matters worse, Bossett directed a lot of his rage towards Tanya. He still held a grudge for all of the stuff that had happened when he was a child. In an interview, his sister Portia stated, quote, "When we were kids, she wasn't the best mom, but she tried to make up for the fact that she wasn't there for us. He could never get over the fact that she wasn't." Now, obviously, Tanya had felt guilty, so for the longest time, she kind of accepted this behavior from Bossett. But she drew the line when she started to believe that he was also taking out his anger on his defenseless little brother. It turned out Bossett was jealous of his brother and the attention and care he got from Tanya. Shortly before her death, Tanya had found bruises on Nazir, and she came to the conclusion that Bossett was physically abusing him. It's suspected that at this point, she told him he needed to move out of the apartment. Sometime on the morning of February 25th, Bossett attacked Tanya with a knife, fatally stabbing her in the neck. After calling his friend William Harris and asking for help, the two of them had gone to a hardware store and purchased that reciprocating saw with money they stole from Tanya. They then spent the day cutting her into pieces and disposing of her body over the following night and morning. Perhaps the most heartbreaking part of all of this is that it's believed the bulk of the crime happened while 7-year-old Nazir was asleep in another room of the apartment. Both Bossett and William Harris were charged with multiple offenses, though in the end, only Bossett was charged with murder. William agreed to take a deal, pleading guilty to hindering prosecution. However, despite the overwhelming case against him, Bossett attempted to fight his charges until the end. During trial, his lawyers argued that he wasn't criminally responsible for any of his actions due to his mental health issues. A jury didn't buy this, though, and he was convicted of both murder and unlawful dissection of a human body. Thanks to his deal, William served just 3 years in prison. Bossett, meanwhile, was sentenced to 25 years to life in December of 2016. As you might imagine, Tanya's loved ones were devastated by all of this, especially when they learned the details of what had happened to her. And while they acknowledged that they understood that Bossett was not well mentally, many of them said they still couldn't process the tragedy, and that they didn't think they would ever be able to forgive. Some went further. Tanya's sister, Cassandra, called her nephew a monster, telling the media at the time, quote, "He took away one of God's angels, and for that, he deserves to go to hell." Speaking of Cassandra, it appears that she ended up raising Nazir following Tanya's death. At the time of this recording, Bossett McLean remains incarcerated at New York's Clinton Correctional Facility. According to the latest available information, his earliest eligible release date is June of 2039. I'm just going to let you know right off the bat, this last case is unsolved. That being said, it definitely fits with today's theme. We also decided to include it because it remains an ongoing investigation, and police are actively asking for assistance from the public. So our thinking is that the more eyes that are on this one, the better. On October 17th, 2003, a young couple from Scottsdale, Arizona, were very excited. 19-year-old Lisa Guerreri and her boyfriend, 20-year-old Brandon Rumbaugh, were going to be spending a romantic evening together to celebrate their anniversary. Though Lisa and Brandon had only been dating for a year, they were madly in love. This was obvious to pretty much everyone who was close to them. Friends and family could see that they were a perfect fit. Very early on in their relationship, Lisa and Brandon had bonded over their shared love of music. Lisa had a beautiful voice and was a singer with the choir at her church, while Brandon was the drummer in a local band. But they soon found that the similarities between them ran a lot deeper. Lisa was enthusiastic, outgoing, and upbeat, and brought a real energy to everything that she did. It was a running joke amongst loved ones that she had to say good morning to everyone she saw, and that she had this way of effortlessly brightening your day. Brandon was more of a goofball and was known for his sense of humor, but he shared Lisa's unwavering optimism. Both of them were very driven and had dreams that they were actively working towards. For Lisa, that dream was becoming a wedding planner. At the time, she was studying business management at Mesa Community College, while also working for an Arizona utility company called the Salt River Project. Brandon, meanwhile, had served in the Marine Corps Reserves for 2 years out of high school, and had transformed himself from the classic lanky kid to a muscular man. He wanted to help others do the same, and one day hoped to open his own gym. In the meantime, he was attending Arizona State University, working on the side as a personal trainer and building up his client list. Of course, Brandon and Lisa also had dreams for their life as a couple. They had moved in together about 2 months earlier, and one day planned to get married. They weren't in a rush, though. At the very least, they wanted to finish school first. Besides, they figured they had their whole lives ahead of them. Tragically, though, that would turn out not to be the case. That day, which again was October 17th, Lisa and Brandon left their apartment in Scottsdale and started driving north. They were headed for a section of desert in Yavapai County, where they planned to spend the night camping. Now, it appears this was sort of a last-minute idea. Originally, Lisa and Brandon had wanted to spend their 1-year anniversary at Disneyland, but after pricing everything out, they realized there was just no way they could afford it. So instead, they decided to recreate their first date. They would spend the night, just the two of them, out in nature, looking up at the stars. To help them out, Lisa's mother Paula agreed to lend them her white Ford F-150 pickup truck. She also loaned them her camcorder to document their trip. The couple took a bunch of blankets and sleeping bags and figured they would set up in the bed of the truck for the night. This spot that they were heading to was a place where Brandon had been in the past. It was off of Interstate 17 and was close to a ghost town called Bumble Bee. According to media reports, this area is now pretty popular with campers, but back in 2003, it was a lot more secluded. People still went up there for mountain biking, horseback riding, ATVing, prospecting, stuff like that. But it wasn't as well known as it is today. A couple hours after Lisa and Brandon left, Paula called to check in on them. She asked if they were there yet, and Lisa said not quite. They had a bit further to drive, but everything was going well. Paula told them to be careful, they replied that they would, and with that, they said their goodbyes. Little did Paula know, though, this goodbye would be their last. The following morning, the plan was for Lisa and Brandon to come back home. They were only supposed to be camping the one night, and Brandon was scheduled for a shift at the gym where he worked. But much to everyone's shock, he and Lisa never showed. Right away, Paula was worried. No matter how many times she called her daughter, she couldn't get a hold of her. And she knew that Lisa wouldn't have agreed to extend the trip without telling her. Initially, Brandon's family was a little less concerned. They even floated the idea that maybe he and Lisa had run off and secretly gotten married in Las Vegas. But as the hours passed with no word from them, this became less of a joke and more of a desperate rationalization. Loved ones actually started to hope that it was something stupid like this, and that Lisa and Brandon were just going to surprise them. Now, it's important to note that while Lisa and Brandon's families knew the general location where they had gone camping, they had no idea where the exact spot was. Luckily, though, some of Brandon's friends, who had been with him on trips before, were more familiar with the area. And when Brandon didn't turn up for work, they took it upon themselves to go out looking. In the meantime, Paula organized searches of her own to the best of her ability and contacted the police. This would go on for another day until a discovery was made. On the afternoon of October 19th, 2003, Brandon's friends spotted Paula's white F-150 in a dirt parking lot just off of Bumble Bee Road, about 2 miles from the interstate. At first, they were overjoyed. However, that quickly changed as they got in a little closer. That's when they discovered Brandon and Lisa lying unresponsive, still in their sleeping bags in the bed of the truck. Both of them were dead. As awful as this was in and of itself, things quickly got worse when investigators from the Yavapai County Sheriff's Office arrived and concluded that what had happened here was no accident. Both Brandon and Lisa had been shot multiple times in the head, and no weapon could be found at the scene. Also missing were Lisa's keys and the camcorder they had borrowed from her mother. Because of this, it was nearly impossible to say what the motive behind the crime had been. Despite the couple of missing items, robbery seemed unlikely because the couple's other possessions and valuables had been left untouched. There were also no signs of a sexual assault, nor a significant struggle. In fact, police would later reveal that they believed Brandon and Lisa were either asleep or getting ready to sleep when they were murdered. They also stated that Lisa might have woken up during the attack, but that they couldn't say for sure. Finding a suspect proved just as difficult. Newspaper records from the time mentioned that many people were interviewed, particularly those who had also been camping in the vicinity of where Brandon and Lisa were found. Ultimately, though, no arrests were ever made. The one clue the detectives did eventually find was perhaps the most haunting part of this whole thing. Close to where the truck was parked, they recovered a disposable camera. Authorities determined that the camera belonged to the couple because there was surveillance footage of them purchasing it at a grocery store back in Scottsdale the same day that they left. The camera was broken and it looked like it had been thrown, but 3 of the images on the film inside were able to be developed. It was these images that the case would come to be known for, and when you see them, it's easy to understand why. 2 of the 3 images show Lisa and Brandon each sitting in the back of the white pickup truck. Their sleeping bags and blankets can be seen next to them, suggesting that the photos were taken very shortly before their murders. Now, obviously, these pictures are incredibly eerie on their own, but there's another, more controversial layer to this as well. You see, while police have always maintained that Lisa and Brandon snapped the photos of each other before things took a tragic turn that night, that's not what everyone believes. Paula has repeatedly said that she does not think Lisa's smile looks genuine in this final image. In interviews, she told reporters, quote, "It wasn't her smile. It was like she was scared and she was smiling." As for the third photo, it was arguably even more mysterious. Almost the entire image was overexposed, likely due to when the disposable camera was thrown and damaged. As you can see, only a small corner of it was able to be developed properly. But based on the lamp and a couple of other small details, investigators theorized that it was captured inside of a local business in Bumble Bee, which at the time was a restaurant. It's thought that maybe Lisa and Brandon went to this restaurant before heading out to their campsite. Did someone see them there and follow them? The unfortunate truth is, we just don't know. This brings us to theories of the case, of which there are essentially 2. Either this was a random crime of opportunity, likely committed by a complete stranger, or Brandon and Lisa were targeted by someone they knew. Both are terrifying possibilities, but if you ask me, the latter is particularly scary, because it would seem to suggest that the killer was close enough to the young couple to know exactly where they were headed that night. Speaking of that, some newspaper articles from back in 2003 cryptically mention that family members of Brandon and Lisa had their suspicions about who could be responsible. But as far as we can tell, this information has never been shared with the public. The closest thing we could find was another comment about Paula in an article, which states that she has always wondered if there was some type of jealousy situation involving her daughter. At the time of this recording, We are just months away from the 22nd anniversary of this awful crime. And sadly, these last images of Lisa and Brandon remain just as chilling and poignant as the day that they were found. The most recent update we could find in the case was from 2023, though from the sounds of it, police were on a promising path. In segments with local news outlets, Yavapai County Sheriff's Office Commander Tom Boltz told reporters that the department was employing the latest tools available to them, including genetic genealogy. He hinted that an undisclosed piece of evidence from the crime scene had been sent off for DNA testing, and that with the help of volunteers, they were also tracking down and re-interviewing witnesses. He summarized the general state of the case this way, quote, "Right now we're in the phase where we're working with genealogy, trying to get some identification from some of the DNA that was at the scene so that we can generate some leads and hopefully find out who did this. There are still persons of interest. There are a lot of people we've interviewed, a lot of people that we've investigated. We can't say any of them are no longer persons of interest, but the nature of these things is you start big and get small, and we're still in that medium phase where a lot of people are still on the radar. We're just waiting for something to break. Somebody to come forward to tell us something, or DNA, or some other test that may be coming down the pipe." As for the loved ones of Lisa Guerreri and Brandon Rumbaugh, they remain hopeful that answers are finally coming after all these years. Many, like Paula, are understandably tired after waiting so long in this state of agonizing limbo, and say that they just want to know who did this and why. I know I, for one, am certainly hoping that they soon get the closure they deserve.
Before we wrap up, we'd like to take a second to give a huge shout out to everyone who has made it this far into the video. Seriously, thank you so much for watching. If you found today's upload interesting and informative, we'd be honored if you consider liking and subscribing, as well as hitting the notification bell and selecting all notifications to stay up to date with our latest releases. If you're looking for additional ways to help support the channel, we'd love to have you join us over on Patreon. Patrons get ad-free and early access to all of our content, as well as 4 additional stories per week for each of our Crimes of the Week and Crimes of the Week International videos. You can learn more at patreon.com/crimezone, where you'll also find some of the fine folks whose names are currently on screen. All that being said, we understand that not everyone has the means to support financially, and that's totally okay. We appreciate every like, sub, share, and comment that you send our way. Once again, thanks so much everyone, and take care.